Grandma whispered. I've seen enough. Then left me the safe code they swore had been lost for 20 years. Her hand was shaking a little as she pushed the folded bit of paper into my palm, the thin hospital sheet rustling when she shifted. The monitor behind her beeped steadily, indifferent. I could smell antiseptic and the awful overcooked carrot smell of whatever they'd served her for dinner. The TV in the corner was playing some muted game show, colors flickering across her lined face. Don't open it here, she added, the words catching on her dry throat. Not yet. Wait until they've gone home. Then you go to the house and you open that bloody thing. Her eyes, faded blue but still sharp, flicked to the doorway, where my mother's voice was drifting in from the corridor, rising and falling with my uncle's in that low, tense rhythm of people talking about money and pretending it's about what's best. It was a Wednesday afternoon in late autumn, the kind where the light is already going gold by 3 o'clock and everything feels a bit brittle. I'm 32 now, but in that moment I felt 12 again, sitting at her kitchen table, listening to grown-ups say things I wasn't supposed to hear. For context, my grandfather died when I was 11. At the time, there was a whole drama about his old floor safe, the one bolted into the wall of the spare room cupboard. Everyone knew it existed. He'd kept it since his days running a small panel-beating business. Family lore was that he'd stashed something important in there, but when he died, my dad and uncle announced the code was gone. Must have taken it to the grave, they said, half joking, half annoyed, like Pop had played one last inconvenient prank. They tried a locksmith once, apparently, but then dropped it. And the safe just stayed, this ugly beige box behind a row of winter coats, a running joke at Christmas. Treasure in there, hey? Yeah, pity we'll never know. I learned pretty quickly that asking questions about it made my dad's jaw tighten. I'm the youngest of 3 and the only daughter. My brothers, Sam and Joel, fit the family mold better than I ever did, sporty, blokey, went into trade straight after school. My dad likes things he understands, and he understands men who come home dirty and tired and crack a beer. Me? I was the kid with ink-stained fingers and opinions. I liked books, asked too many questions, cried at things Dad thought were no big deal. Mum's favorite way of describing me, usually to other people in front of me, was our sensitive one. When I was a teenager and started calling out stuff, Dad's drinking, the way they spoke about money like it was all a personal failing if you didn't have enough, that shifted into dramatic. The person who never used those words about me was Grandma. Her name's Ruth, but she's been Gran to me forever. She and Pop lived in a squat brown brick place 5 streets over from our old house. It smelled like furniture polish and eucalyptus, and the backyard was all veggie garden and concrete. When I was little, she'd sneak me an extra biscuit and say, "Don't tell your mother," with a conspiratorial wink, like sugar was state secrets. When I was older, she'd pat the chair next to her and say, "Go on then, tell me what they've done now," when I turned up red-eyed on her doorstep. She never said my parents were wrong to do whatever they'd done, cancel a sleepover, dismiss something I cared about, but she always listened, and every now and then she'd mutter, "Your father's too much like my Harry," under her breath, like that explained everything. Harry was my grandfather. He died suddenly of a heart attack one Tuesday. One moment he was fixing a leaky tap, the next he was face down on the laundry tiles. The weeks after that are this blur of casseroles and stiff black shoes and Mum crying in the kitchen while Dad loudly talked about funeral costs. I remember the day they stood in Grandma's hallway, the safe door still firmly shut behind coats and mothballs, and declared the code lost. I remember the way Grandma looked at it, this tight, appraising look, and then at my dad and uncle. But she didn't say anything. She just turned and went back to the lounge, where I was sitting with a plate of sausage rolls, and put her hand briefly on the back of my neck, grounding me. It wasn't until years later that the safe turned into more than a weird family quirk. Money has always been an undertone in my family, like a low hum you don't notice until it spikes. We're not destitute, but we're not doing great either. Dad's a mechanic, Mum works part-time at a pharmacy. They got into some debt in their 40s. Credit cards, a personal loan that ballooned. There were fights behind closed doors, snatches of, "We're drowning," and, "I didn't sign up for this," leaking down the hallway. When I got my first job at 19, they started making jokes about charging me board, and it stopped being a joke pretty quickly. By my late 20s, I was out, renting a rundown terrace with 2 strangers and working as an admin assistant at a law firm while trying to finish my social work degree part-time. Every time I saw my parents, there'd be a dig about my never-ending uni, or how books don't pay the bills. Every time they mentioned Grandma, it was about her needing more help, more money, more management. She'd started to slow down by then. Falls, a mild stroke, the slow indignities of aging. Dad and Uncle Mark took over her banking. To help. I watched them talk over her at appointments, sign forms, reassured doctors that she's fine at home, we've got it under control. When I suggested maybe we talk to someone about in-home support that wasn't just family, Dad frowned and said, "What, you think we're not doing enough? We're not putting my mother in some home to rot." The thing is, Grandma did end up in a home, not because anyone put her there against her will, but because one day she slipped in the shower, broke her hip, and the doctors basically said, she can't live alone anymore. Suddenly Dad and Mark, who'd been adamant she was fine, were overwhelmed and resentful. The home they finally picked was okay. Not fancy, not awful. Functional. The sort of place where the halls smell like disinfectant and pumpkin soup, and there's always a TV on too loud somewhere. I visited twice a week. Mum went, but less, Dad even less than that. There was always a reason, long hours, car trouble. What am I going to say to her? Grandma never complained, but once, when we were alone, she said quietly, "Funny, isn't it, all those years they insisted I needed them. Turns out I just needed a railing in the bathroom and a walker." When her health started to really dip, the vultures circled hard. I don't know a better way to describe it. It sounds harsh, but I watched it. Aunt Sue started asking more detailed questions about Grandma's arrangements. Uncle Mark, who'd been mysteriously broke for the last decade despite running his own business, suddenly became very invested in the value of her house. Dad, who'd been grumbling for years about how much time he spent mowing her lawn, began dropping phrases like fair share and compensated for years of effort into casual conversation. I mostly stayed out of it. For one thing, I wasn't really part of those talks. For another, any time I tried to suggest that maybe we should think about Grandma's actual wishes, not just assets, I got shut down. "You don't understand what it's like to have responsibilities," Mum would say. "You're not even settled yourself." But Grandma still had moments. Clarity cut through the fog sometimes like a knife. One of those moments happened about 10 minutes before she pressed that paper into my hand. They'd asked me to come by the nursing home to talk about plans, which I knew was code for "we're going to discuss money in front of Grandma and pretend it's about her care." I got there to find Mum, Dad, Uncle Mark and Aunt Sue squeezed into the tiny visitor's lounge with a clipboard between them. Grandma was propped up in the recliner, lips pressed together, eyes sharp in a face that looked suddenly small. "I'm just saying, the market's not going to stay like this forever," Mark was saying. "If we wait 6 months, we could be down 50 grand. I'm not rushing into anything because you've got gambling debts," Grandma said sharply. The old fire in her voice startled me. Mark flushed. "That's not—" "It's exactly that," she snapped. Then she sighed, shoulders slumping a little. "I know I can't live in the house again. I'm not stupid. But it's my home. It's not just numbers on your sheet." Dad rubbed his forehead like he had a headache. "Mum, we know. We're just trying to be practical. The fees here aren't cheap. We're paying them." Aunt Sue added quickly, as if Grandma had somehow missed that point. "Out of your pension. There's only so much to go around." I couldn't help it. "There's the investment funds," I said. I'd seen references to them in some paperwork I'd helped Grandma fill out after her stroke. Pop had a super account, some shares. They weren't millions, but it wasn't nothing. 3 pairs of adult eyes swiveled to me like I'd farted in church. What funds? Uncle Mark asked sharply. The ones in her file, I said. From Pop's business. The super, the old term deposit, the managed fund? Mr. Clark, the advisor? I looked at Grandma. You told me about them. Sue's mouth thinned. Those are being used, she said. There were costs. Legal things. You wouldn't understand. I felt my stomach drop. Legal things like what? Mia, Dad said warningly, a note in his voice that still makes my shoulders hunch. This isn't the time. When is the time? I asked. I could hear my own voice wobbling. You're talking about selling her house. Shouldn't we know everything? Mia, Mum cut in, with that tight smile she uses in front of strangers. Not now. Grandma looked between us. Her gaze landed on me, and for a second, all the noise dropped away. Just me and her, and the beep of the monitor. That was when she said quietly but clearly, I've seen enough. Her hand was cold when she grabbed mine. Take me back to my room, she told me. Just you. Mum started to protest, but Grandma gave her a look that could still have stopped a train. I'm allowed to speak to my granddaughter alone, she said. Unless you've made a rule against that too. So I wheeled her back down the corridor, the linoleum squeaking under the chair. Once the door was closed behind us, she sagged back and closed her eyes. For a second I thought she might have fallen asleep. Then she said, without opening them, Open the top drawer of the bedside table. I did. Inside was a half-finished crossword, a bottle of hand cream, and an old glasses case. Glasses case? She muttered. I picked it up. It rattled faintly. Inside, folded into a tiny square, was a scrap of notepaper with 4 numbers and a hash of Pop's messy handwriting scratched behind them. I told them I'd lost it, Grandma said, opening her eyes. They didn't need to know everything, not then. I thought maybe they'd grow up a bit before I handed it over. Maybe they'd treat you better. Maybe I wouldn't have to use it. But I've watched them for 20 years. She met my eyes. I've seen enough. That's when she pressed it into my palm and gave me those instructions. I drove to her house that night like I was doing something criminal. My hands shook on the steering wheel. It felt wrong to be going there without her, even though I still had a key and had been in and out a million times to water plants or grab her cardigan. The house was dark, the kind of deep dark you only get in places that have been empty for a while. The porch light was off. I turned it on, of course. The switch was in the same spot it had always been, a little higher than it should be, because Pop installed it himself. Inside, the air was stale and slightly damp. They'd unplugged the fridge, moved some furniture, but otherwise it was like she might walk back in any minute. Her slippers by the door. The crochet blanket folded over the arm of her armchair. On the hallway table, a stack of mail, bills, junk, a letter from the aged care home requesting direct debit confirmation. I went straight to the spare room. The wardrobe still had that faint camphor smell. I pushed the coats aside, Grandma's old winter one with the missing button, Pop's ancient suit. And there it was. Beige metal, dial in the center, faint scratch where Mark had once tried to pry it open, back when it was a novelty. The note in my hand trembled. 32-14-07-59, it read. I felt weirdly guilty even reading it. As if the safe might bite. Okay, I whispered to myself, because talking out loud made the room feel less oppressive. You just turn the thing. It's not a bomb. Left to 32. Right to 14. Left to 7. Right to 59. My heart pounded harder with each click. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I felt, more than heard, a soft thunk as something inside released. I just stood there, hand on the handle, not breathing. This thing had been a question mark in my life for 2 decades. Every Christmas, some uncle had joked about Pop's hidden treasure. Every time someone mentioned the safe code being lost forever, I'd felt this little itch, the sense that we were all playing along with a story that wasn't entirely true. And now I was about to see whatever version of the truth had been locked up before I even hit puberty. I pulled. The door swung open with a hiss of slightly sticking rubber. Inside was less dramatic than part of me had expected. No gold bars, no guns. Just paper. Stacks of it, bound with those ancient brittle rubber bands. A small tin cash box. A hard plastic sleeve that clearly held something like certificates. On the inside of the door, taped with aging brown masking tape, was an envelope with my name on it. MIA, in all caps, written in Pop's unmistakable scrawl. My knees went weak. I sat down hard on the faded carpet. Dust puffed up like a ghost. You know those movie scenes where someone opens a letter and you see a dramatic montage of their childhood as they read? Real life is not like that. Real life is sitting cross-legged on the floor, fingers fumbling because the paper is so fragile you're scared you'll rip it, heart pounding in your ears so loudly you have to read each line twice. I won't copy every word here, but the gist of Pop's letter was this. He'd set the safe up in the early 90s, when he sold his panel-beating business. He was never a rich man, but the sale left him with a decent nest egg. He'd watched his sons, my dad and uncle, fumble with money their whole lives, borrowing, gambling, making investments that were really just long shots. He loved them, but he didn't trust them with the future. Then there was me. I was apparently a bossy little 6-year-old when he wrote it. He talked about me sitting at the kitchen table, carefully lining up my crayons by shade, asking him why he didn't charge more for some jobs because that looks really hard. He wrote about how I'd saved my pocket money to buy Grandma a new mug after I broke her favorite one, even though she'd said it didn't matter. I see the way your dad talks over you, he wrote. I see the way he tells you to stop making a fuss when you cry. I see your mom call you dramatic when you're just telling the truth. I can't fix all of that. But I can do this. This was detailed in the rest of the papers. The tin box held passbooks and statements for an account in my name, opened when I was a kid. Not a huge balance, but more than anything I'd ever had at one time. The plastic sleeve contained share certificates for a few blue-chip companies, nothing splashy, but with dividends that had quietly accrued. There were also copies of documents, a declaration of trust signed by Pop and witnessed by his old mate and by Grandma, stating that certain assets, specific amounts from the business sale, were to be held for my benefit, not to be touched by any other party, including my sons. At the end of the letter, he'd written, I'm putting this in the safe for Ruth to decide when to tell you. If you're reading it, it means she thinks you're old enough and that she's seen enough to know you'll use it wisely. Don't let them bully you out of what is yours. But don't let it turn you hard either. You're better than that. I cried so hard I gave myself a headache. Partly because of the money, let's not pretend it wasn't huge. The idea that there was something out there that could maybe finally get me out of share houses and overdraft fees was dizzying. But mostly because of the validation. Someone else had seen it. Seen the way I was treated, the way my feelings got turned into punchlines, and thought I deserved a little protection. I went through the rest of the papers slowly. There was more than just my stuff. There were old wills, one clearly superseded by a newer one, the copies Grandma's lawyer already had, I'd later realize. There were notes about loans he'd given Dad and Mark over the years with never repaid, scribbled next to more than one. There was a letter to Grandma, shorter than mine, telling her he trusted her to know when the time is right. The time was clearly now. Driving home, I felt like the car was floating. Then the panic set in. What the hell was I supposed to do with this? If I just marched into the next family meeting waving the letter around, I could picture the reaction. Dad accusing me of forging it. Uncle Mark demanding a cut. Mum crying about how I was tearing the family apart. If I didn't say anything and quietly tried to access the funds, there was a risk of doing something wrong legally. These accounts were old. Some of the institutions had merged or changed names. I worked at a law firm, but in conveyancing, not estates. I knew enough to know I didn't know enough. The next time I saw Grandma, she was weaker. Her hands shook more, her voice came out as a whisper. But when I told her, quietly, that I'd opened the safe and found the envelope, she smiled. "Oh, good," she breathed. "He wasn't an idiot after all." "What do I do?" I asked, perching on the edge of the bed. "They're going to lose their minds." Her eyes flicked to the doorway. Mum was out at the nurse's station filling in some forms. I could hear her laugh. "You don't have to tell them everything," Grandma said. "Not all at once. But you don't hide it either. Not out of shame. It's yours. Harry wanted it that way. That part's between you and the bank and the lawyer. What you tell the others, that's up to you." "I don't want them to think I manipulated you," I said. "They already say that. That I turn you against them." She snorted, which made her cough. "If I haven't decided what I think of my own sons by 84, I'm beyond help," she said. "They made their choices. I made mine. Don't take that away from me." She died 3 weeks later. It wasn't dramatic. No last-minute hospital dash. Just a phone call at 5 a.m. from the home, a quiet voice saying, "She's gone, love." I sat on the edge of my bed, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the laundry basket. There's always some mundane object in your line of sight when your world shifts. Mine was a pile of unmatched socks. The days that followed were a blur of logistics and casseroles, again. Déjà vu with extra gray hair. The same funeral director, even. The same little chapel. Dad did his manly crying in private routine. Mum leaned heavily on anyone who would listen, telling them how hard it had been, how much she'd done. Uncle Mark talked loudly about honoring Mum right, while arguing with the florist about prices. The reading of the will was less dramatic than any movie would make it. Grandma had gone the conventional route, 3 children, equal shares of the house, minus a small donation to her church, some specified items to various grandkids. I got her sewing machine and her recipe books. My brothers got Pop's tools and his fishing gear. It all seemed fair enough. No one mentioned the safe. I'd made an appointment with one of the senior lawyers at my firm, an older woman named Karen who does estates. I'd shown her the papers from the safe, hands shaking slightly as I laid them on her desk. She'd adjusted her glasses, read them silently, then looked up at me. "Well," she said, "your grandfather was more organized than most. Is it real?" I'd asked. "I mean, obviously it's real paper, but legally. The trust declaration is valid," she said. "It's dated, witnessed properly. The assets are specified. And they're in your name, which helps. Banks don't tend to keep accounts active forever without some contact, but see these stamps? That means the interest was being rolled over. Someone's been in there occasionally." "Grandma," I said. "Almost certainly," she agreed. "If anyone wanted to argue about it, they'd have a hard time. It doesn't take anything away from your father and uncle, it's separate from the estate that's being probated. These aren't joint assets. They were specifically carved out by your grandfather before he died. So if my dad kicks off and says it's unfair..." She gave me a wry look. "Then he's welcome to spend a lot of money on legal fees to be told the same thing," she said. "You are entitled to this, Mia. The question is whether you feel safe claiming it." Did I? That was the $1 million. Well, more like low 6-figure question. In the end, I decided on a compromise between secrecy and waving a victory flag. I'd start the process of accessing the accounts quietly, with legal backing. If, and let's be real, when my parents found out, I'd present the documents and Karen's advice. No sneaking. But also no voluntary self-sacrifice to keep them comfortable. I didn't have to wait long. 2 months after the funeral, I got a call from Dad. "Did you know about this?" he demanded. "No hello?" I was at my desk at work, staring at a spreadsheet. I muted my computer and leaned back in my chair. About what? This letter from the bloody bank, he snapped. They keep sending stuff here for you. Says something about dormant account activity and trust beneficiary. What is that? My stomach did a neat little flip. I'd given the bank my address, but some communications were still going to Grandma's house, now technically owned jointly by Dad, Uncle Mark, and Aunt Sue. Yes, I said. My heart was pounding, but my voice stayed level. I know about it. It's from an account Pop set up for me. Grandma told me about it before she died. Silence hummed down the line. You mean to tell me, he said slowly, that there's been money sitting in accounts all this time, and you and Mum kept it a bloody secret? I didn't know until a few weeks before she died, I said. She gave me the safe code. I opened it. There were documents. She wanted it that way. What safe code? He barked. The one for the floor safe, I said. In the spare room. You got that open? His voice jumped an octave. Yes. Without telling us? She told me to, I said, feeling the old urge to apologize rising like bile. I swallowed it down. It was her house. Her safe. Her choice. He swore. You manipulative little. He caught himself, maybe remembering I was legally an adult and also at work. You've always had a way of getting her on side, he said instead. Poor old girl, she'd believe whatever sob story you fed her. I felt my fingers dig into the arm of my chair. The spreadsheet on my screen blurred. She wrote the letter 20 years ago, I said, forcing each word out. Pop did. His handwriting. His signatures. All dated long before I was old enough to feed anyone a sob story. I want to see it, Dad said. All of it. Fine, I said. We can meet with my lawyer. She can explain it. My lawyer, he mimicked. Listen to you. I didn't rise to it. When are you free? We ended up sitting in Karen's office, me on one side of the little conference table, Dad and Uncle Mark on the other. Mum and Aunt Sue had refused to come. I'm not subjecting myself to that circus. Mum had sniffed, but we all knew they were waiting by their phones. Karen was professional and calm. She laid out the documents, explained the trust, the dates, the legal standing. Mark tried to argue that the money should count as part of the estate. Karen gently, firmly, said that it didn't. Dad accused me of going behind their backs. She pointed out that I had no legal obligation to involve them at all. So Grandpa's beloved business money goes to her, Mark said bitterly at one point, jerking his thumb at me. Not to his sons who actually helped him build it. Karen didn't blink. Your father chose to give certain assets to his granddaughter, she said. You received other benefits, loans, support. There are notes here, actually. She tapped the copies Pop had made of those unpaid IOUs. He kept track. Dad's face went a strange shade of red. Mark went very quiet. My father. Dad started, then stopped. My own father didn't trust me. It was like watching someone realize the sun sets in the west for the first time. Part of me wanted to soften it, to say something kind. Another part remembered every time he told me I was untrustworthy, too emotional, not good with money, whenever I dared to question his decisions. He loved you, I said. But he saw things. Same as Grandma did. He stared at the paper. For a second, I saw something like hurt there instead of anger, and it was almost worse. So what now? He asked finally, looking up at Karen, not me. No, she said. Mia can choose what to do with what's hers. You can choose how you respond. They walked out without speaking to me. I sat in the empty office for a while after, staring at the impression their chairs had left in the carpet. The fallout at home was intense. Mum called me the next day and went straight to crying. How could you do this to us? She sobbed. After everything we've done for you. We thought when Mum died we'd finally have a bit of breathing room, maybe pay off some debts, maybe do some work on the house. And now you're hoarding money while we struggle. It's not hoarding, I said. It's literally what Pop set aside. It's been sitting there for 2 decades. It doesn't fix the fact that you're in debt because you opened credit cards to buy things you couldn't afford. That's a horrible thing to say, she snapped. You've changed, Mia. This isn't who we raised. No, I said quietly. It's who I grew into despite how I was raised. The words surprised even me. So did the steadiness in my voice. My brother's reactions were complicated. Sam, the eldest, sent me a single text. Good on you. Don't let them guilt you out of it. Joel, who still lived at home, was more conflicted. Dad's taking it hard, he told me over coffee. He keeps saying he was a bad son. Mom keeps saying you're punishing them. I'm not punishing anybody, I said. I didn't set this up. Pop did. Grandma decided when to tell me. I'm just not pretending it doesn't exist. He stared into his mug. Do you need it? He asked. I nearly laughed. Joel, I'm one unexpected bill away from eating instant noodles for a month, I said. Yeah, I need it. He nodded slowly. Then use it, he said. Buy a place. Get out of rentals. Do what they always told us to do and get ahead. Just be ready for Mom to make it a thing forever. She has, of course. Anytime I say no to anything now, it's, with all that money you've got? Must be nice. If I go on a cheap weekend away, it's, oh, Miss Moneybags on holiday. She tells people, half joking, that I took Grandma's money, conveniently leaving out the part where no one else had a claim to it. It stings. I'd be lying if I said it didn't. Some nights I lie awake and think maybe I should have just split it 3 ways to shut them up. Maybe I should have been the bigger person. But then I remember Pop's messy handwriting. Don't let them bully you out of what is yours. I used some of it to put a deposit down on a small flat. Nothing fancy, a 1-bedroom in a 70s brick block with questionable carpet and a view of other people's laundry, but it's mine. When I got the keys, I stood in the echoing lounge room and said out loud, "Thanks, Pop. Thanks, Gran." Then I cried again, because apparently that's my thing. I've also used some to cut back my hours at the firm so I can finish my social work degree without working myself into the ground. When I told Mom that, she said, "So you're just not going to work full-time when you've got the chance? Must be nice to have that luxury." "It's not a luxury, it's a choice," I said. "One I can finally afford to make." There's a lot of guilt tangled up with the gratitude. Guilt that I got this when my brothers didn't. Guilt that my dad is hurting not just because of the money, but because the safe confirmed something about how his own father saw him. I'm trying not to let that guilt override the truth. The truth is, my grandparents weren't perfect. Pop could be stubborn and quiet to the point of cruelty. Grandma stayed silent sometimes when maybe she should have spoken. But in the end, they both chose to trust me. They saw me. In a family where I'd often felt like the too much one, the difficult one, the dramatic one, they wrote my name down and said essentially, "This one. We believe in this one," Grandma whispered. "I've seen enough." Then left me the safe code they swore had been lost for 20 years. I think about that a lot, especially when Mum starts in with, "You've changed," or Dad makes some snide remark about, "Bet the lawyer told you you're special." Maybe I have changed. Maybe having a little security has made me less willing to roll over. Maybe knowing that someone 2 decades ago thought I'd be worthy of trust has shifted something in my spine. What I'm trying to hold on to is this: sometimes the people who know us best aren't the ones making the most noise. Sometimes love looks like extra biscuits and a hand on the back of your neck when things are scary. And sometimes it looks like 4 numbers on a scrap of paper, folded small and hidden away until someone you trust decides you've seen enough, to